Have you ever wondered what happens to the echoes of screams when a building is abandoned? Do they dissipate, or do they sink into the walls, waiting for someone to listen? Welcome to Dark Murmurs, where reality unravels in whispers. Tonight, we explore the decaying monuments to mental suffering. David Chen had built a modest following documenting forgotten places. His YouTube channel specialized in the stories behind abandoned buildings rather than just their decay. This methodical approach reflected his personality. He was a history teacher by profession, organized and skeptical by nature. The Ridgemont State Psychiatric Hospital had been on his list for years. Its imposing Victorian architecture visible from the highway, but protected by no trespassing laws until recently. Now declared a historical site awaiting renovation, David had secured a rare permit to document the facility before construction crews arrived. The late October air carried the scent of rain and rotting leaves as he approached the main building, its broken windows like dark, vacant eyes. In his pocket, he carried his grandfather's pocket watcher ritual good luck charm he brought to every exploration. The administration wing yielded the expected scenes papers scattered across floors, nature reclaiming offices through broken windows. David narrated calmly into his recorder, noting architectural details and historical context. It was in the beast wing, where long-term patients had once been housed, when something changed. A door at the end of the corridor, which David was certain had been open moments before, was now closed. He replayed his footage, confirming his memory. "Old buildings settle," he said aloud, his voice sounding unnaturally flat in the stale air. As he approached the door, his camera's battery indicator dropped from 82% to 15% in seconds. The temperature around him plummeted, his breath suddenly visible. When he finally pushed the door open, the room beyond was empty, except for a single patient file lying open on the floor. File that appeared pristine, despite decades of abandonment. The name on the file was smudged, but the admission date was clearly visible. October 27th, 1963, exactly 62 years ago to the day. David photographed the file, but left it untouched, making a mental note to mention it to the Historical Society. He reasoned that someone from a previous tour must have placed it there, perhaps as a prank or for atmosphere. The next few rooms contained nothing unusual, just the expected urban decay and remnants of institutional life. He filmed a segment about the hospital's transition from treatment center to custodial care facility, explaining how patients were often admitted for conditions we wouldn't consider mental illness today. The historical facts comforted him, providing structure and normalcy. He didn't notice that the shadows in his footage were slightly too dark, or that some didn't move correctly with their sources. When he checked the time on his grandfather's watch, he failed to observe that it had stopped at 3:42, though he'd wound it that morning. The treatment wing was where Ridgemont's darkest history resided. David's research had uncovered records of experimental procedures performed here in the 1960s, often without proper consent. The hydrotherapy room still contained massive tubs, where patients were once immersed in ice water to calm them. As David filmed, the pipes overhead began to vibrate, a metallic groan building until a single drop of water fell from a rusted faucet, impossible in a building without running water. For decades, in the electroshock therapy room, David found restraint chairs arranged in a perfect circular, unnatural configuration in the otherwise chaotic building. His camera's focus began to malfunction, blurring and sharpening at random intervals. When he reviewed the footage, several frames showed shadowy figures seated in the chairs. visible only for milliseconds between cuts. The pharmacy still contained shelves of ancient medication bottles, their contents long since removed. As David narrated the history of psychiatric medications, he noticed his voice becoming hoarse, as if he'd been talking for hours rather than minutes. The temperature continued to drop, and when he exhaled, his breath lingered unnaturally long in the air. Behind him, unseen in the moment but visible in his footage, the bottles on one shelf rearranged themselves to spell out a single word: stay. Basement level housed the records room, its shelves still lined with thousands of patient files. David had expected this. It was common for administrative documents to be abandoned during hasty institutional closures. What he hadn't expected was to find his own name on a drawer. His hands trembled as he pulled it open, revealing a file with yellowed papers and a black and white patient photograph that made his blood freeze. The face was his grandfather's identical. 2 photos David had seen, but the name listed was David Chen, admitted October 27, 1963. The file detailed a patient with delusions of existing in the future, who insisted he was born in 1988 and had traveled backward somehow. The final treatment note, dated March 17, 1964, recommended a lobotomy to cure these time delusions once and for all. The procedure was scheduled for 3:45 p.m. The attending physician had signed off with a note. Patient keeps referring to a pocket watch as proof of his claims. David's hand moved to his pocket, withdrawing his grandfather's watch, the one he'd been told was a family heirloom. The time frozen on its face. 3:42 p.m. With sudden, horrifying clarity, David remembered the family secret that his grandfather had no siblings. Yet David's father had appeared at an orphanage in 1964 with no records of his birth parents. The resemblance between David and his grandfather had always been remarked upon as unusually strong. David fled the records room, his camera swinging wildly as he ran. The hospital around him began to shift flashes of clean, operational corridors interspersed with decay. Overhead lights that hadn't worked in decades flickered to life as he passed beneath them, only to die again in his wake. He heard voices, now clinical, detached voices, discussing treatment options and prognosis. Patient continues to resist reality integration. A voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. David's own thoughts became fragmented. Was he David Chen, born in 1988, or was that the delusion? Had he somehow traveled back in time, been institutionalized, then lobotomized into forgetting his true identity? Was his entire life his career, his YouTube channel, just an elaborate fantasy constructed by a damaged mind? He found himself in a surgical suite, its equipment impossibly pristine amidst the surrounding decay. On the table lay surgical tools arranged for a transorbital lobotomy. The wall clock read 3:43 p.m. David's reflection in a stainless steel cabinet showed his face morphing between his own and his grandfather's, the features blurring and shifting as if time itself was unstable. "This isn't happening," David gasped, his voice no longer sounding like his own. "This is impossible." From the hospital PA system, a voice announced, "Preparing for procedure in Operating Theatre 6. Dr. Whitaker to Operating Theatre 6. The watch in David's hand suddenly ticked forward to 3:43. David Chen's camera was discovered by renovation crews 3 days later, lying in the middle of an empty surgical suite. The footage ended abruptly at the moment David entered the room. Despite extensive searches, no trace of David himself was ever found. The Historical Society noted with interest that the hospital records, which should have filled the basement room, were also missing us if they'd never been there at all. The final frames of David's footage, when enhanced by forensic experts, revealed something overlooked in initial reviews. The reflection in the stainless steel cabinet showed not David alone, but David seated in a surgical chair, with a doctor standing behind him, an ice pick-like instrument poised at his eye socket. The time on the wall clock in this reflection, 3:44 p.m. Most disturbing was what authorities found when they searched David's apartment, a journal written in his handwriting, detailing his life after the procedure, describing a confused existence, where he sometimes believed he was living in the future, documenting abandoned places to find his way back. The final entry, dated the day before his disappearance, read only, "I think I've been here before. I think I've always been here." The Ridgemont State Psychiatric Hospital renovation was quietly cancelled. The building was demolished 6 months later. Construction workers reported numerous equipment failures and unexplained accidents throughout the demolition process. Several mentioned hearing a pocket watch ticking inside the walls. The boundaries between past and present, between memory and illusion, are thinner than midnight. Have you ever experienced a moment of déjà vu so powerful it made you question which version of reality was true? Share your thoughts below. For more journeys into psychological darkness, subscribe to Dark Murmurs. Remember, some buildings are empty, but others are simply waiting for someone who belongs there to return. Welcome to Dark Murmurs, where reality unravels in whispers. Tonight, we explore the decaying monuments to mental suffering.